you had to describe your OCD with a song, what song would you pick?
It's so anti-melodic. It's like that. There's no song. It's like that's the sound that it makes. So you try to make a song out of that.
Hi, I'm Patrick McGrath. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at NOCD, a platform online to help people for the treatment of OCD and related conditions. And I'm honored to be here today with John Green.
Hi, I'm John Green. I'm a novelist and YouTuber and a person living with OCD, and I wrote the book called Turtles All the Way Down that's now being turned into a movie. It's about a young woman struggling with OCD, which I have also had for pretty much my whole conscious life, so I'm excited to talk with you.
Looking at the movie, which I got to see already, which was wonderful, so thank you for the sneak peek. I appreciate that.
Thanks for watching it.
What do you think is important about having a really realistic impression of what OCD is in the media?
Well, as I'm sure you have also felt, I've been very frustrated sometimes with the portrayals of OCD in the media, either seeing it romanticized as a disease that gives you like secret superpowers, makes you brilliantly observational like TV detectives, or as a disease that's highly stigmatized, that's treated as freakish, or especially around the compulsive behaviors, treated as sort of a spectacle. And the truth for me is that the compulsive behaviors make a lot of sense in the sense that when you're in a lot of psychic pain, you'll do what you need to do to manage that pain and to relieve it. And so I wanted to try to make a story, and I think Hannah, the director, wanted to make a movie that tells a realistic story because we haven't seen enough of those.
Right.
But of course, no single movie can tell the whole story of OCD. It's not WebMD, the film. Ultimately what we were trying to do is tell Aza's story of living with OCD, but in a way that was realistic and hopefully resonates with people.
Because of that, and I love that explanation, what do you hope that people who haven't really understood what OCD is will get from the film?
Well, the first thing for me is that there's a reason the O comes first. in obsessive compulsive disorder, that so much attention often goes to the compulsive behaviors, especially in film, because they're very visual sometimes, and they can seem unusual to some people. But for me at least, it begins with a lack of control over my thoughts and a sort of blizzard of thoughts. There's this great Edna St. Vincent Millay poem that begins, "Blown from the dark hill hither to my door, 3 flakes, then 4 arrive, then many more." And that's sort of what it's like for me. I'll have one kind of passing thought, one snowflake fall, and then 3 of those snowflakes fall, and then 4, and then many more. And then it becomes this almost blinding, white blizzard of total immersion where I really can't function. And I wanted to try to find some kind of form for that in the story. It's relatively easy to say what pain is like, to say that pain is like a stabbing in the back, or pain is like a thumping in the head, or whatever. It's very hard to say what pain is, especially psychic pain. It's so way down. It's so resistant to language. And so when I was writing the book, I was really trying to fight to find some kind of language for it.
On the flip side, then, for people with OCD who watch this, how do you think they'll react finally seeing a more realistic view of what OCD is?
Well, it's kind of you as an expert to say it's more realistic. I hope that's true, and I really appreciate you saying that. I hope that they'll feel seen, and most importantly, understand and not alone. I think OCD can be very isolating, partly because we tell ourselves stories that this is really, really weird, really, really strange, really, really I've often felt like, nobody else thinks this way. Nobody else feels this way. This is freakish. This is weird. And I remember one of the most helpful things that my psychiatrist ever said to me was I confessed an obsessive thought that I'd been having for months that had really just had so much power over me that I was terrified to even say out loud. And my psychiatrist just very calmly said, "That's not unusual." And I was like, oh. And so sometimes we hold this stuff in because we're so afraid of it. And, I hope that people feel less alone.
I often say to my patients, and we call them members at NOCD, so the members that I work with, if you tell me something I've never heard before, I'll give you $1. And I only give up about $3 a year.
Yeah, no, I mean, that really is true, though, because you really feel, or I really feel like there can't be anybody else who's going through this. But in fact, there are so many people who are going through this. And that's what's so helpful about working with a psychologist who has extensive experience in OCD, who has experience in ERP and knows how to work with people who live with this.
If you had seen this movie as a teenager, probably maybe even before starting some treatment and with effective therapy, what would it have been like for you?
Well, I think I would have known that I had OCD, which I didn't know.
Okay.
That's the first thing. But I also think I hope anyway that I would have seen it and thought like, felt a measure of relief in knowing that I wasn't. I mean, at the time when I was a teenager, I thought of what I was going through as just utterly unique and terrifying and disgusting and horrible and all of those adjectives. And so I think to see some version of it on screen, even if it wouldn't be a perfect one-to-one match with my experience, I think I would have definitely felt like I'm not alone.
What was it like for you finding out what it was that you had and that there was a name for it?
It was a big relief for me to have a name for it.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's universal, but for me, it felt like, okay, we can handle that. There's a great Mr. Rogers line: anything mentionable is manageable. And it became much more mentionable once I had a name for it. And that came both from a therapist recognizing that I likely had OCD, and also from reading a book. I don't know if you've ever read this book by David Adam called The Man Who Couldn't Stop, but it was very helpful for me.
I also like the Mr. Rogers phrase, "You can never go down the drain," which
yes,
we've used in OCD treatment as well too for people who have that fear.
Absolutely, yeah, and versions of fearing going down the drain can be really profound.
I've even used other stories like that. I talk about OCD being like Lucy holding the football, and Charlie Brown is always going to try to kick it. That's in his nature. And she's always going to pick it up because that's in her nature. And that's OCD's nature, to always do what it does. And people will say, why does it have to do this? And I say, because it's the nature of OCD.
Yeah, that's so true.
For Asa, we see her in the movie as being reluctant at first to really go into the ERP therapy. Toward the end, we see this beautiful montage of the rest of her life. You kind of fit in what a lot of people experience, where maybe there's a resistance at first to get some help and then hopefully a giving in. Tell us about that, maybe for your own life or for what you hope for her too. Yeah,
I mean, in my life, I was definitely highly resistant to ERP when it was first presented to me. It seemed like exactly what I didn't want to do. And I'm sure you hear that a lot.
I've heard that before.
From patients.
Yeah, I've heard that.
seemed like the opposite of a good idea. But it is very effective, and it is the gold standard of treatment for OCD. And so it was important for us to include that in the film, both to include her reluctance to do it, her unwillingness, her quickness with which she says, like, that's not going to work for me. I'm not open to it. And then over time, to come to a place where she is open to it, and she understands that it will be an important part of her journey. As far as, and that's similar to my own experience. As far as why I wanted to show Asa having a good life. I get really frustrated. Like I live with OCD. I don't expect to be magically cured at this point in my life.
Right.
I used to kind of root for that, but I think that's probably not going to happen for me. But I also have a really good life, and I have periods where I'm quite sick, and I even I've had periods over the last 10 years where I was debilitatingly sick, and where I wasn't able to function and wasn't able to be the kind of person or father or husband or writer I wanted to be, and that's very frustrating. I don't want to minimize how hard it is and how painful it is, and yet also I have a good life.
Yeah.
and those things can coexist. My brother has ulcerative colitis, and he is sometimes very sick, and also he has a good life.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of hope that I lean into, because it's the kind of hope that actually stands up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell people like you should have hope that life is sunshine and rainbows and never a struggle, but I do think that despair lies. Despair tells a simple story that's very compelling, and there's just one problem with it, which is that it's wrong.
Yeah.
So I hoped in the story that we could get across that Asa is going to go through difficult times in her life, but she's also going to have a good life.
I've always said my goal is to help you to become comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, especially that's something that ERP especially is good at.
Yeah. And the notion too that therapy isn't always going to be comfortable.
Right.
I think
Right.
a lot of general therapy, it hopes you leave the session feeling better than you did when you came in.
Right.
And ERP therapies, I hope you feel like you ran a marathon by the time you leave the session.
Yeah, sweaty and and tired and in need of a nap.
Exactly.
But it works.
It does work, yeah. How do you think then your own treatment has impacted how you've written about OCD and how you look forward to the future as well?
Well, I mean, there have been times when treatment has been very effective for me and times when it's been less effective. But, I'm in a good place right now because I have good tools that I learned through therapy and a good medication regimen that works really well for me. And so, for the last few years, I've had periods of bad mental health, but I haven't had periods of really intense OCD feelings, which is a nice change.
I've heard, yeah.
Yeah. I would take almost anything over the really intense pain of OCD. I've been fortunate, but also I've done a lot of work. I mean, the biggest thing for me is that I've been able to access treatment when so many people can't, and our systems are not particularly well developed yet when it comes to really providing good comprehensive mental health care, which is one of the reasons I think NOCD is doing such important work.
Thank you. Yes, because so many people who have OCD would have to drive to a city because that's where the specialists are.
Absolutely.
And they'd have to pay cash.
Right.
And so to be able to do it virtually anywhere and to be able to take insurance was a big part of the story of our company as well, too. I had the chance to listen to some of your podcasts and things you've done with your brother and everything. And one that really caught my attention, and I'm so excited to ask you this question. You two were talking about knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge and how in some ways OCD would also like you to get knowledge, but all the knowledge, there's never enough knowledge. And so how have you, even in researching things for books, come to a point where you've decided, I have the knowledge I need and I don't need to go where OCD might want to take me to?
That's a great question. And I have not always done a good job of that, to be honest with you. Right. OCD wants you to have all the knowledge so you can close the loop on the worry. So you can say, I'm definitely not going to get this disease, or I'm definitely not going to have this happen to me. But of course, there is no amount of knowledge that will allow you to close that loop. And yet, kind of compulsively checking for it can, at least for a while, for me, bring a little bit of relief. But then down that road, for me, lies, well, suddenly now I'm spending 6 hours a day checking the same websites, reading the same books, reading the same lines, even over
sometimes
and over
the same
again.
sentence, right?
The same sentence over and over again for hours. And now I'm really losing a lot of time that I want to be spending learning about other stuff. This was a challenge for me when I was writing The Fault in Our Stars, for sure, which is a book about 2 young people living with pediatric cancer. And it was a challenge for me when I was writing Turtles All the Way Down as well, in a sort of meta way, like reading about OCD became a sort of obsessive thing. And for me, it's when I start to know that I'm losing time and I'm losing a lot. Is this taking away from my relationships? Is this taking away from the work that I want to do? But honestly, that's part of the reason I still need to be in therapy, is I still need to be able to check in with my therapist and be like, am on the wrong side of this because it's hard for me. It's hard for me to know where the line is, and it's really hard for me to know where the line is with worries.
Right.
And so I kind of do rely on outside input sometimes, whether that's my spouse or my therapist.
In the movie, we see Asa struggling with contamination, and most people think of OCD as that. But I really appreciate that you brought in existential concerns, relationship concerns, and I think that really helps people break this notion that OCD is just washing my hands or
Right.
straightening up the bookshelf or something like that. Can you talk about what the impetus was of putting some of those other things and what you would hope people would learn about OCD from that?
Well, exactly that, and also having Daisy actively point out that OCD does not make Asa a good detective, but it actually makes her really bad at noticing even basic things like the
Right.
fact that her best friend has changed her hair color. And we wanted to include it because we knew that we could only tell Asa's story.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to make it clear that Asa's story isn't the only story or the only story that matters,
Right.
and that Asa's story touches on important other issues. I don't know if this is common for people with OCD, but I know it's been my experience, which is that my OCD will find sort of one landing point, one way in. I think of it as like almost like finding a foothold somewhere and then kind of growing from there. But it will grow into other places if I let it. And so that's a pretty good examination is a fear of contamination leading to a thought, well, if 50% of the cells in my body aren't mine, and some of those cells in my gut, some of those bacterial cells in my gut are responsible for some of my thoughts, like they are associated with mood changes and stuff like that, then I start to feel like, well, am I me? Who's running the ship exactly?
Yeah.
Who precisely is in control, and like to what extent am I a sort of I think Asa refers to it as a story that you whisper to yourself, and to what extent are you really real? And that becomes its own focus of obsessive fear and its own thing that's hard to close the loop on. And so I wanted to show how, and I'm not a psychologist, but this is my experience, how it can find a foothold, spread, and then that can become another foothold.
I love the whisper idea, as when I've treated people who are Muslim and they have scrupulosity or OCD about religion, they have a belief of a whisper in their ear from a demon, and how that plays a role. So I think that's a great storyline to take a look at, where that's really coming from. And we see Asa wanting to live a life, and we see OCD wanting to pause that life, right? I want to kiss Davis, but then I have to go do compulsions. I want to be with someone, but I can't be with them. That struggle is so very real for people with OCD, either in a job or in a relationship or something. And how has that affected you, and what did you bring from your own life probably into some of those stories as well too?
I brought a lot of myself into Asa's experience. I don't know what it's like to be 16. I don't know what it's like to be a girl. Even when I was 16, I didn't know what it was like to be 16. I felt like I was an anthropologist at high school, just what is happening here? I felt very removed from all of it, almost depersonalized. But I did bring a lot of myself to her. I changed some of the focuses of her obsessive fears just to kind of keep myself feeling safe, if that makes sense, and feeling like I could be me. But I wanted to show both how it affects the self or the sense of self, but also how it can have such a profound effect on relationships. I mean, one of the great frustrations for me is that when I'm really stuck, first off, like when I'm really sick, I can't read a menu, let alone function in the world. But that affects my ability to be the dad that I want to be, to be the husband I want to be. And ultimately for me, the biggest impetus to really aggressively pursue treatment is a feeling of, it's not just about me. Like I have other people in my life I love who this is affecting.
Yeah, it definitely is not a sole person experience. It's a family experience.
It's a family experience. And, and it's a family experience, and it is really profound on the family as well. And, I think a couple times my kids have seen me have panic attacks. That's scary for them.
Sure.
and it's scary for me too. I would much prefer to have a panic attack alone, for sure.
Yeah.
It's just better in general. But
Mhm.
and they've seen me go through difficult times, but I hope that in that they've also seen that there's a real people always I'll just use the word. I do think that there is a bravery in it, that there is a bravery in like in doing the work and trying to get better and in resisting that despair
Yeah.
and continuing to seek treatment, and when it gets difficult, not responding the way that I used to, which was just to kind of shut down.
One of my favorite phrases is, in order to be brave, you must first be afraid.
Mm.
And so I think that's exactly what you're describing there.
Yeah, I do think that for people living with OCD, there is a lot of bravery in seeking treatment, especially in seeking treatment with ERP. You know it's going to be hard, but it is, we know that it's the most effective tool we have.
Yeah. One thing we do know very much is no one's ever been talked out of OCD.
Right. You're not going to talk therapy your way out of it.
Yeah.
There I think some, I don't know what the research says, but I have found some CBT strategies helpful for me.
Sure.
But ultimately, I'm not going to talk my way out of it. I'm going to talk my way right back into it.
Right. Since most people think of therapy as talking and they figure maybe we could talk our way out of OCD, I always say we really need to behave our way out of OCD.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's and that's uncomfortable for a lot of, not all the time, but for a lot of the time, for a lot of people. For me, it's uncomfortable, but it also, there's such, my life is so much better than when I lost 8 hours a day to compulsive behavior and the just sweating,
Sure.
intense fear that I was trying to manage. And so it is uncomfortable especially when it's really hard, but the rewards are real.
I want to pull a couple movies in on this. So you have someone going through chemotherapy and how physically uncomfortable that is in order to be better. And in OCD, we talk about you have to go through the emotional discomfort in order to be better. And so very much in our society, I would say we accept that it's okay to be physically uncomfortable now in order to be better later. But we're still kind of lacking on the idea that it's okay to also be emotionally uncomfortable now in order to be better later.
That's so true. I think that's a great observation.
And that's really what ERP is, the goal of learning that you can handle emotional discomfort.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be final. It's not as catastrophic as it feels like it's going to be.
And we don't throw you in the deep end of the pool either.
Right.
We stick a toe in the water and see how it feels.
Yeah.
And I like to say that too, because I don't want to scare people away from treatment. We are not here to flood you by any means. We want you to learn that you can slowly and gradually acclimate to this experience.
Right.
On the flip side of that, we don't ever talk about a cure for OCD because you live with OCD. And how is it looking at how you were before to now living with OCD? What would you say are some of the biggest differences in your life with that? Obviously, there's spikes and things like that happen still too.
Spikes and new issues emerging at times. Like it can find a new foothold in my life in different ways. But the comparison is night and day, really. If I think about when the periods when I've been at my sickest, there was a period in 2015 when I was really, really sick, a period in 2008 when I was really, really sick. I wasn't able to, forget about writing, I wasn't able to be in the world.
Yeah.
So much of my consciousness had been ceded over to these fears and to the compulsions that it was just, I would get out of bed knowing that a huge percentage of my day was going to be going to that.
Yeah.
And I was just so afraid. I was so scared all the time. The fear, the pain of fear was so intense. And now I still glimpse that, and of course, like I said, I had a period in 2008, I had a period in 2015, I had a period of major depression last year. It's not that, anything is guaranteed in a mental health journey, But now I can at least, when things get bad, I can at least say, as the old Liberian proverb goes, no condition is permanent.
Mhm.
And, and I feel like I have tools now to help me get through and find a way forward,
Yeah.
which I really didn't have before. And some of those tools are medicine. A lot of those tools are stuff I learned from ERP, or always knowing that I can go back and do it again. Yeah, that helps a lot. And it's really, my life is radically different today.
And on a personal side, thank you for that too, because there are so many people who come into treatment who have never seen someone either with this or don't even know that people can get better from it. So you being open and talking about it is hope for people, which I appreciate very much.
Thanks. Yeah, it is uncomfortable to talk about. It's still a heavily stigmatized disease. And there are still a lot of people out there who I think are told that, or who feel like I did, that it's something to be embarrassed about or ashamed of. But that's the disease talking combined with our society talking. That's not real. The truth is this is pretty common, and there are lots of people who live with really intense versions of this and still live good lives.
How do you deal with maybe some of the day-to-day tropes of OCD? We all have a little OCD.
It does drive me a little crazy. I'm not sure. And then I just used the word crazy incorrectly. So maybe I'm participating in it. It is a little frustrating for me when people like talk about being neat or whatever, or having good hand washing hygiene. Like, those things should be celebrated. Those things aren't problems. They aren't problems for you. They aren't getting in the way of your life. Like, right. I think it's great that you wash your hands for 20 seconds 3 or 4 times a day. Like, please continue to do that for all of us. I think it's great that you're neat and orderly. It's different when it becomes, when down that road lies so much pain. That for me is where it's really different. Like, it's hard to describe the intensity of fear that people experience, but it's so overwhelming. It's so scary. It's so real. It's as real as anything I've ever felt. And the terror of it is absolute. And the pain of it is unprecedented. I've had meningitis. I've had all kinds of different pain. I've had, compound fractures. And this is a whole different level for me.
I'm really glad you said that. I do a webinar every Wednesday, and every week I get the same question. Why does it feel so real?
Yeah, because it is real.
Right.
It feels so real.
Yeah.
It feels absolutely real. It feels as real as every other real thing that I live with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's frustrating. It's because it's like, why does it feel so real? Like because like there's a little part, at least with me, there's always a part of me that's like, I know that this is bonkers. It does feel so real. And I think like on some level, when we're talking about feelings, if it feels real, it is real. Right. It is real. Like there's nothing unreal about the pain or the fear or the overwhelmedness. All of that is really real.
Yeah. There's no difference if a snake fell on you from the ceiling and you jumped. The same feeling happens in OCD. It's the triggering of the fight, flight, or freeze response. So
yeah. And there's a lot of things that I'll do to not feel that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like people talk about these compulsive behaviors and everything, but like I'll do whatever I need to do to not feel that.
Compulsive behaviors are obviously so interfering in people's lives, but I think it's also important to talk about there are 2 kinds of compulsions. There's the behaviors, the things people will see, and then there's the mental behaviors as well too. How has that interfered in your life as well, in addition to what maybe people could see happening?
I think what people can see gets a lot of attention because it's visual, it's portrayed a lot in movies, often very poorly.
Yeah.
The brain spinning, the brain returning, checking, asking. It just takes over. And when it takes over, that's when I can't read a menu. That's when I can't read a book. That's when I can't, I'll be trying to listen to somebody and genuinely trying to, even if it's my kid, and I really want to be there. And I'm giving everything I can to listen, and it's just not there.
Asa talks about the thought spirals, right? And so Was that how you described it for yourself? Is that where it came from? Or,
Yeah, there's this Raymond Petty Bond painting that's prominently featured in the film.
Love that painting, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it too. I
Mhm.
saw it in an art show. My wife is a curator of contemporary art, and it's just a painting of a really intense, colorful spiral. And I remember like grabbing my wife and being like, "That's what it is. Like that's what it is.
Mhm.
It is a spiral." And it's almost like it sucks you in, you know. And the thing about a spiral is it will get tighter and tighter and tighter forever. If you zoom in enough, it is literally infinite. It will never stop getting tighter.
Yeah.
And that's really how I felt, is like, this is never going to release me. It's just going to get more and more and more intense forever.
Yeah.
And that's its own form of terror.
Mm-hmm. I like too how you brought in the philosophy piece of it with the concept of the turtles all the way down. Does that have a link to OCD for you, thinking of those two things?
It does a little bit. So the Turtles All the Way Down story that the book gets its title from, I'll just retell it to you briefly for our friends who don't know. It's this old story about a scientist who gives a long lecture on the history of the universe and how the Earth orbits the sun, and the sun orbits the center of the Milky Way, and the Milky Way itself is in motion. And this is how the universe works. And at the end of the lecture, an old lady in the back raises her hand and says, well, that's all fine and good, everything you just said, except it's wrong. The Earth is a flat plane resting on the back of a giant turtle. And the scientist, thinking himself very clever, says, well, then what is the turtle resting on? And the woman says, the turtle's resting on another giant turtle.
Mm.
And then the scientist says, well, but what is that turtle resting on? And she says, you don't understand. It's turtles all the way down.
Yeah.
And there's two ways in which OCD is a turtles all the way down phenomenon for me, an infinite regressive phenomenon. One is that when I am looking to close that loop, to get enough information to finally be able to not be fearful anymore,
Yeah.
I am looking for the bottom turtle, and there is no bottom turtle because it is turtles all the way down.
That is
It is
correct.
an infinite,
Yep.
there are an infinite number of turtles. I simply will not get to the bottom turtle.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing for me is that I need to understand that I am real, and that I am a human being in the world, and that I'm kind of a collection of infinite turtles. Like
Mhm.
there's an aspect of me that is infinite, you know, in the sense that like I'm never going to be able to fully catalog all of my eccentricities or all of my personality. I'm never going to be able to like you know, fully understand what, like, why am I afraid of this? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Instead, I need to accept myself as I am, even though I won't ever be able to fully understand it.
I saw turtles all the way down as someone will ask me a what if question, and I could give them a logical answer, which will then be followed by what if's cousin, which is yeah, but what if?
Right.
And there's always one more yeah, but
Well,
what
always
if?
one more.
Then there is
Yeah,
logic.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like I have been through that my whole life. Another version of it that I talk about sometimes is the why game that my kids play, where I'll say something and they'll say,
Why?
but why? And I'll say, oh, because of this. And they'll say, why? And
Mm.
you know, eventually I get to like, because you know, like we have to presuppose some things in order to make our way through the world.
One of the things that's been surprising when I'm treating people with OCD, they say, wait, you don't think all day long about all these things? And how do you kind of see your brain working differently than maybe even your wife or your kids in the way they approach the world and you do?
Well, I didn't think that my brain was different for a long time. I figured
Okay.
that everybody spent all like your patients. I figured that everybody spends all their time,
Sure.
you know, trying to manage fear
Mhm.
and manage really intense fears. But once I began to understand it, I was like, well, that sounds nice. You know, I mean, my main feeling was like, well, that feels like a cheat code. That
Yeah.
doesn't seem fair at all.
Mhm.
And yet now I do feel like I still lose some time every day to obsessive worry. I don't want to pretend that I'm like, I cured, you know, like I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you said, you don't really use that word.
No.
I don't really think in that context. but I'm able to have more of a life. Like I'm able to do more things. I'm able to, have a certain amount of freedom. I'll give you an example. I drove the pace car at the Indy Grand Prix. I'm from
Wow.
Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Indy 500's a big deal. They didn't let me drive the pace car at the Indy 500. Haven't made it that far in life, but they let me drive it at the Indy Grand Prix, which is like the road course a couple weeks earlier.
Okay.
And I remember my psychiatrist saying, first off, I remember my psychiatrist saying, like, I want you to just take a second. I remember my psychiatrist saying, I want you to just take a second to appreciate how impossible this would have been 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
for you to be in front of people this way, for you to be driving a car, on a racetrack, like, this is incredible. And like, I understand that you're kind of pushing yourself and you're worried about it, but like, look, this is a moment of progress. And when you can
Absolutely.
have those and you can look back and think like, wow, I really am able to do things I wasn't able to do before. It's quite encouraging.
Are there still things you hope to do?
There are a lot of things I hope to be able to do. Yeah, there are some things that I can't do that I would like to be able to do someday.
Good.
So I still got stuff that I've got to work on.
That's awesome. Well, always have goals, right?
That's right.
That's what we always want to do. When we look in the movie, I'm going to go back to that montage at the end of Aza's life and one idea of what it could be. Did you ever have a moment like that where you could suddenly see where, wow, maybe it could be that way instead of being stuck in what OCD thought for you? I always ask people, do you want to live your life or do you want to live OCD's life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, the biggest moment for me was when I really started to understand what I had, that there was a name for it, and that there were treatment strategies for it, and I did start to imagine like, oh, I could be. I started to think of what I could do. I'm not going to be somebody who jumps out of an airplane.
It is fun. I've done it.
Of course you have. First off, I don't believe you that it's fun. We just have fundamentally different definitions of fun.
We may. Yeah.
And that's okay. But like there are so many things that seemed unthinkable that I just thought like, well, people like me can't do stuff like that.
Right.
And I was so limited by that for so long. And I'm still limited by it in some ways. Like I just said, I don't think of myself as somebody who's going to jump out of an airplane. But I do feel like I have a lot more opportunity now to think about what's possible. And some of that is on a very basic level, like about writing.
Yeah.
I used to think like I can only write one kind of thing. I always wrote young adult novels, and that was the only place where I felt comfortable writing. And then I wrote a nonfiction book. It turned out that I can do that. I wrote this book called The Anthropocene Reviewed. That's a collection of essays. And there was a time in my life where I would never have imagined that to be, something that I could do. Like, and so I do want to keep expanding the story of what's possible. And like you said, I want to live my life, not the life that OCD wants to live for me.
I do want to get a hot dog stand in Iceland at the hot dog stand you described. It sounds wonderful.
We have there's a great hot dog stand in Iceland. I highly recommend it. I wrote a whole essay about it.
It was great.
I like that hot dog so much.
When I was jumping out of the plane, just a fun story.
Yeah.
You have to put your head next to the jump master on your first jump. And so I'm leaning into his neck, and he says, as we're standing on the wing of a plane, he says, "You don't seem anxious." And I said, "Well, I do run an anxiety clinic." He said, "Oh, then we'll flip." And instead of just falling, we flipped 8 times in a row before he let the little chute out. And we were just going vroom, 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 vroom around.
Did you feel anxious?
A little. But it was so exciting too.
Oh man. I mean, I'm a little envious of your ability to not feel anxious even when you're flipping.
Yeah.
Great. Good. That's great. I still got work to do.
There's always things to face, right? And I think every day you're facing new things as well too. You're writing different kinds of things, you're doing new podcasts and stuff. And what advice do you give to people? Because obviously people write to you or seek you out. How do you talk to folks who come to you for advice? What do you tell them?
Well, the first and most important thing is when it comes to your mental health is to seek treatment. Seek treatment from qualified professionals, and listen to them, and do the work. Because to me, you're not going to get answers from a novelist. Like, I hope that my book is helpful, but my book is going to be helpful as a mirror and as a window to reflect something back to you about yourself and maybe to see through into someone else's life. It's not going to be helpful to you as therapy.
Yeah.
It's a great honor for me when therapists, especially therapists who work in OCD, share turtles all the way down with their patients, but they don't share it in lieu of therapy.
It's a part of.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's maybe a part of saying you're not alone. It's not a path to a solution. And I think that's really important, and that can be really difficult. It can be really difficult to seek treatment. It can be really difficult to find treatment that works effectively for you. It's one of the things I really like about NOCD is that it's focused, on people with OCD, and all the therapists are trained to work in OCD specifically. Yeah. But then the second thing I say is that it always feels permanent. It always feels like forever. It always feels complete when it's really bad. It feels like this is the whole story of your life. This is the only thing. This is the only thing you can ever be, the only life you will ever have. And that's just not true. Like, that is part of this incredibly seductive lie that despair tells. And I understand falling for the lie. I have fallen for it many times myself, but it's a lie.
OCD, of course, attacks the things that are important to you. No one has OCD about something they don't care about, right? And so that can be anything from family and relationships, religion, anything of that nature. I'm not going to ask you about what's going on in your life currently or anything, but just in your past or for what you've seen in the book, how important were some of the things that came up in the movie, or have they been to you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my anxiety is focused on health, which is very important to me. Relationships, very important to me. And the irony, of course, is that it can be very destructive to your health and to your relationships.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that I've had to accept over the years, is that what might feel to me like an appropriate level of vigilance can very quickly morph into a destructive force in precisely the places that I care the most about.
Yeah, because frankly, OCD doesn't care about you or your friends or your family or your writing or your job or anything. It cares about itself. I think it's the most selfish thing in the entire world, actually.
Yeah, it's very much, I mean, I often think of it like a virus, or like some kind of infectious disease. Like, it will spread as much as it can for as long as it can.
And it's never satiated too. It always wants more.
It always wants more, just like any virus.
And then even if you feel for a moment like you might have achieved something, it says, "Oh, now round 2."
Yeah, and that's part of what's been hard for me over the years is, I've had like really good experiences with ERP and other forms of cognitive behavioral therapy as well, but especially with ERP and but yeah, then comes round 2. Like, then it finds a new way in, and I think that's what I have to come to terms with, is that that's okay. Like, in the same way that my brother will have long periods of health from ulcerative colitis, and then he'll have a flare up. And when he has a flare up, he never says, like, I mean, it's very frustrating and it's very upsetting, but like, nobody would ever say like, you're a failure or your previous treatment failed. Right. They would say like, well, we got to go again.
Yeah. And when we're going again, I mean, obviously if there is a flare up, that can be kind of defeating, or it can be depressing or something. What keeps you motivated to keep going forward?
Well, I get pretty frustrated, to be honest with you. I get pretty discouraged, and I'm one of those people who can get down on myself pretty fast.
Okay.
But when I eventually emerge from that, and I have to, what I try to tell myself is, this is going to be, you're a little bit more experienced than you were before.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little bit easier than it was before. And you're going to do it not just for yourself, although you are going to do it for yourself, but you're also going to do it because you're not here, you're not living this life to be controlled by this thing. You're living this life to be in community and in relationship, and to do work that you love, to love and be loved, to know and be known. And this is standing in the way of that.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to open the door, right?
Yeah.
Move forward. What do you hope people get from the book, from the movie, that they'll take away and use to motivate themselves going forward?
Well, I think for people who live with anxiety or OCD or other mental health disorders, I hope that the most important thing I hope is that they take away a sense that it's possible and even common to live a full and rich life while also living with mental illness.
Yes.
And then for people who love and support those living with those illnesses, I also wanted to write the book for them because that's also hard.
Yeah.
That's also hard work. And it can also be very scary to see somebody you love suffering so intensely. And so I wanted them to feel less alone too.
One of the things I often see with those caregivers is inevitably the things they do that they think are going to be helpful are sometimes the things that lead the OCD to get worse. Not any intention of them whatsoever,
Right,
but,
of course.
but they get involved in safety behaviors.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
what has it been like for you to say to people in your life, don't do this, even if I really want it?
Yeah, I mean, my wife is very good about that. So we've had counseling together, and she understands, she understands that, and she's the primary person I turn to.
Mhm.
And when it comes to those kind of safety behaviors, she knows when it's healthy, and she knows when it's not healthy. She knows when, she knows when to kind of pull the parachute and say, this isn't a me thing. This is this is for you and your doctor.
Yeah, and that's great. And I appreciate that because so many caregivers feel very stuck, or they feel bad if they don't give in to what the OCD wants.
Absolutely. No, I mean, yeah. Because it feels like you're hurting the person you love.
Right. I'll just say to people, you may have a relative in detox who begs you for alcohol and you don't bring it to them. Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, it is very similar.
mm-hmm. It was a beautiful moment in the film where Asa and Davis have their kiss, and everyone's been hoping this is going to come. And it's beautiful for them in the moment. And then there comes a point, that switch in her brain, and you can visually see it, and you can hear it, and there's the compulsion afterwards. And was something like that similar to things you've had happen or inspired by something?
For sure. I've gone through things like that where I feel like maybe I can be, maybe I can make my own choices, and maybe OCD isn't going to be in control. And then if I'm not doing, if I'm not appropriately treated, if I'm not, taking my meds, all that stuff, you can have some really severe consequences from that. And I wanted to show that in the story because I wanted to show that, she's trying so hard.
Right.
Like she's trying so hard, but OCD is also so powerful.
Yeah. And again, definitely why we want to do treatment gradually and build
Right.
up to that
Right,
experience as well too.
Right.
But you also can't fault someone for, there's moments that take over, right?
Yeah, and these moments where you want to be the person that you want to be, not the person that OCD wants you to be.
Yeah.
But then OCD can really bite back and fight back.
Yeah.
And that's why we need those treatment strategies. We need to take our meds. We need
Right.
to we need to do that stuff. And the great thing about OCD, there's very little that I like about it. But the great thing about OCD is that in the vast majority of cases, it really is treatable.
Yes.
And people getting better and being able to live better lives is not uncommon.
Right.
It's quite common.
It just requires an amazing amount of honesty and a great rapport with a therapist to share your deepest and darkest fears and secrets, and thinking that this person might want to throw me in jail or the hospital. And again, I say, well, I'll give you $1. So,
And you don't have to give away many dollars.
no, I really don't. Yeah. So, well, I really want to thank you for spending some time with us today, and really for the work you've done, because it's nice to finally see OCD is not just a joke and not an adjective, but it's a true condition that people live with, and they can learn to live with it. And I think, again, that montage at the end shows that you have the ability to get there, but it takes work to get there, and your own work to get there to where you are too is very inspiring. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. This has been a real pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from you.
Thanks.